I'd like to welcome up Richard Holdaway in that sense. Richard and his family farm, or manager, what do you call it? Do you call he sells farms?
Yeah.
Manager vineyard up in Blenheim. I actually met Richard's brother, who's slightly taller than he is. First of all, a couple of years ago when he was a soil ecologist at Landcare Research, and we were doing a bit of work there. And as he's come home to work with Richard and the family on the vineyard there, I've managed to pay a couple of visits and keep in touch with what they're up to, and there's some pretty exciting stuff. So I'll leave the rest to you, Richard, and thanks very much for coming.
You'll just have to bear with me, this speaking thing isn't really my gig. As Sam said, me and my brother Robbie, give Robbie some credit, he helped me put together the slideshow, along with Mum and Dad, are running the show. So this is us. Anyone who's familiar with Blenheim should be able to locate themselves here. This is the town and the sea, and this is stage 1 heading on north. We run 155 hectares, which is a pretty big operation for vineyards. Produces about 2,500 tonnes of grapes in a medium year, maybe 3,000 in a good one. We're moving a lot to making the wine ourselves now. Just a little bit of vertical integration. And the land before we got here had a history of cropping, vegetable production and dairy. That block there, that was Tally's market garden. That one there was a market garden. This is old family land, as well as that's where I grew up there. So, that's us. Dad planted grapes first in 1980, so I think that counts as an industry pioneer. We've been doing it a long time, but on this scale, basically since I left uni in the early 2000s. So, why take a regenerative approach? This, to be fair, is the neighbour's vineyard. Mine tends to look a little more alternative. When we planted grapes coming out of the cropping farm, honestly, we were regenerative. We took a farm that was being worked and cropped intensively, and we did it a world of good by stopping doing that. When we worked the soil in the old market garden to level it all out, get it ready to plant vines, we were bringing up clods the size of my torso with no structure. Like, you literally put one with a cultivator and be like, what's that? Is that a rock? No, it's a clod. So we regenerated that property to a certain extent by planting in vineyards and stopping tilling it. It honestly took years for the weeds to grow. So in the last couple of years, I've come to realise that yes, we were regenerative up to a point, but then we stopped. And then we just did conventional viticulture for years and years and years, and we were in stasis. And so, learning a few things, we're starting to change things around. So this was really the motivation. In 2005, we were doing 8 to 10 spray runs a year. In 2020, we're doing 14 to 20. That's a big increase in work. It's not getting any easier, and that's just the fungicide program. We also do herbicide, trimming, mowing, harvest, mechanical pruning. Those are all tractor passes. It's a lot of work getting a grape crop off. And obviously those tractor passes are all down the same trend line as down the rows, so compaction. That's basically been what's been kicking me off. I've been seeing it going in a direction I didn't want to go, which is more work every year, more chemistry, more inputs, and less control, if I'm honest. it was easy. Maybe I was just ignorant. Maybe I just didn't see the diseases back then, but it was easier. Right, I've just got 5 things I'm going to go through, though I think these are the interesting things I'm doing. The cover cropping is really what got me into the whole regen ag community, watching YouTubes about cover cropping, and I've been doing that for 3 years now, so both rows of the vineyard over the course of 2 years have had a diverse mix cover crop in them. We'll cover off the sheep because obviously incorporating animals is one of the principles of regen. Disease management, as I referred to before, that's a pretty big part of the operation, so we're trying some more biological things there. And that leads on to plant nutrition, because healthy plants shouldn't get diseases. I know that gets said a lot. Doesn't really happen in my experience. Maybe I've never seen a healthy plant. And then finally, herbicide, which is something that the wine industry is grappling with at the moment, and probably be the trickiest one to last. Anyway, that's the first sunflower of the year is out already. Down a row, unfortunately, the first thing I'm going to do when I go home is run a tractor down there and squish into the ground. Here's just a few examples of a cover crop at various stages. A lot of the cover cropping in vineyards, it's been done forever. I'm not the first. Historically, most people would grow an oat or a small mix of oats, lupins and things in the winter for a bit of biomass, and terminate it in the spring. And then in the summer, a lot of people grow buckwheat because there's been a little bit of science done about buckwheat hosting a particular predator for the leaf roller caterpillar. So there's a couple of things that cover cropping is done. I liked the multi-species idea. I'm really doing it for soil building. The insect thing is a by-the-by as far as I'm concerned. I just want a diverse mix of species, a diversity of insect life, and just basically diversity in a vineyard. This, to my mind, is what it looks like. A lot of people think about a few natives in the corner around a pond and tuis, and that's very pleasing to the eye, but as far as the crop goes, the crop is still a monoculture. Whereas if you're actually talking in a cropping sense, diversity is what's growing within root's reach of your crop. And stuff that's happening over there isn't all that relevant to my mind as far as diversity goes. So this is what I'm trying to do, is just bring diversity back to the vineyard. Instead of having 5 species growing under the vines, all mown short, I'm going for as many as I can. Right. So that's just a few examples of flowers. We've got Viticulture. Viticulture is really common, and a few other wildflowers. That's a nice chicory going off in the middle. Obviously, chicory gets pretty high when it's flowering, so it doesn't last all that long. Right. This is an example of a mix that we did. Kiwi Seed helped me out with this one. There was a really nice lady there who's unfortunately left now, who was dead keen on this stuff. This was a 42 species mix we put together. It's all small seeds, so start with buckwheat and work down. That's just because my disc drill, it's a little harder to put big seeds in with small seeds because they fall to the bottom of the slot. If you'd believe it, this is the same crop. So this is about a month earlier on the left, where you can see the mustard and the tillage radish, and there's a bit of Viticulture in the understory there. And then a little bit later, all of that's flowered, set its seed, and gone. I've actually crimped it in between these passes, and then this is later in the summer, and you can just see the change throughout the year. So a lot of the reasons to do diverse mixes is that it lasts for longer. And we have this wonderful opportunity in the vineyard is I've got all year long to play in the middle of the row. So I can actually have this diversity and still grow my cash crop. And with some provisos, which I'll get into later. So we can do this. And half the reason to grow the flowers is it's just nice to look at. Like, that's why I grow the sunflowers. It's because they just make me smile. No other real reason to include them in the mix, although I'm sure there's some very good technical reason. So now this, how I do this is we run every second row. So you'll see in this shot on the right, there's mown grass underneath the vines, and that's because the other row is the non-cover crop row that I'm running the sprayers in, and that gets mowed once a year probably. The row with the crop in, I'm trying to set seeds. I'm trying to make this crop last as long as possible, so all I'll really do is crimp it. And the next slide, that's a year later. So all that's happened to that is a crimp in the summer to limit the height, and then the sheep were in there for 5 days in the winter. And then it grew back. And I'm calling that a massive success, because I've got a different mix of plants, but diversity, and I didn't have to spend any money on that this year. And this year that's grown up, and I've crimped it down already just to limit the height, and I'm going to see how long it'll run. But when I'm digging holes, I haven't actually got a good slide of the soil profile because I find it hard to take pictures of. But we're seeing roots and soil structure off the bottom of the spade now, which you don't see in a conventional mown vineyard. Like most vineyards in Marlborough, they don't let the grass get more than 6 inches tall, and then they chop it off. And that's every 2 weeks through the spring, probably every month on average. And it means that at the bottom of the spade, you run out of roots, because that's as deep as they go. And yes, the grape roots go deeper, but to get actual soil structure, I believe the cover crop's the way to do it. So this one here is this year's mix. This is the shot before the sunflower, and this is the same block. This is about as wild as I let it get, because we're starting to restrict the airflow here under the vines. I'm going to run a tractor down this row shortly because I have to start trimming. So that will create a mohawk, and I'll leave the bit in the middle and hopefully actually let some flowers come and set some seed before I finally lay it flat once we go dry in the summer. So just to take a step back, we actually only irrigate about a third of our 150 hectares. We're on good deep river silt with the water table, and grapevines will find it. Just talking before someone, it's think of a grapevine like a loose end plant. If it gets its roots down in the water, you don't have to water it. And unfortunately, the convention in the wine industry is to run trickle, run a dripper line down every row and water them from day one. And I'm just lucky that my father always believed that irrigation was unnecessary where we are. And the reason we've put trickle on a third of it is from salt ingress from the brackish water in the river. I think a lot of the reasons that I can do what I do is Dad's forethought with regard to water use and the fact that you can actually grow a crop of grapes on our soils certainly, but a lot of soils without needing to add water. Right. So now we've also done winter crops. This one was planted in the autumn. You can see, you can watch it first. This is a bit of a gimmick. You even get my music that I was listening to. So I do turn it around here in a second. So that's me taking a winter crop and seeding directly into it with no herbicide. Unfortunately, I have to admit that this was pretty much a failure because I did this in December last year and then it didn't rain in Marlborough for about 5 months. So it all looks very good, but sometimes it doesn't work. The crimping worked. So the next slide, that's what it looked like before crimping. I basically held on to that long enough into the season to let the oats head out. This is something nutty that I'm doing. I don't think anyone else is really doing this. Because they basically look at that and say, oh no, airflow and everything. But I'm like, well, if you let those plants set seed and they regrow for you, that's free cropping. It makes so much sense if I can do it, because once that crimps down, the moment you get some autumn rain, you get a crop of oats. It's better than you planted the first time because there's 10 times the seed there. And the sheep love it. It's just, and soil building, everything. And the reason I can get away with it in December is we're under lower disease pressure, but we're also spraying. So we're actually putting products on that are helping with disease. I wouldn't want to do it closer to harvest because we're not allowed to use the products. So that's standing, and then that's crimped down. And I call that a success. Like, that is laying material on the soil surface that's going to provide a mulch for me for later in the year. And we went into that dry summer with that there, and right through that dry period I could find there was a moist layer on the soil surface when the whole district was dusty dry. And I had little bits of clover and greenery coming up through that because of the mulching layer that other people didn't have. So the crimper is actually such a simple tool, but quite a powerful one in my mind, just to stop me having to use a mower, because otherwise I would have had to mow that, just to limit its growth. And yes, I would have side throwed it and I would have created mulch under the vines. But yeah. Anyway, and this is what I'm using the crimper for mostly now, is actually taking a generic multi-species cover crop and just controlling its height. So you can see there, it just lays it flat on the ground. And yes, some stuff stands up and it doesn't work on ryegrass, and fatting is pretty terrible, it stands back up again. But for a tool that I made in a week, it cost me a couple of grand in steel. It's been quite an interesting thing to experiment with as an alternative to what everyone else does, which is mow constantly. Honestly, when we were doing it conventionally, we'd set a guy mowing in September and he'd work 30 hours a week until the end of February, just mowing. He'd get to one end and start at the other. And we're not that big a vineyard. It's phenomenal how much mowing gets done in Marlborough when you think of the big corporate operations. So yeah, that's about all I'm going to say about cover cropping. There's a whole lot more to it. You'll have to come and ask me afterwards if you've got questions. Moving on to the sheep. I'm sorry I don't have photos of us working with the sheep in the winter. I never thought I'd have to talk about it. This is just the fellow I look at out my kitchen window. So the sheep harvest to bud rate is nearly half the year with the vines. So we have a big off season. And to be honest, the vines aren't really growing much at all during that time. So as far as regenerating my soils go, I've got a lot of work to do outside of the growing season as well. So historically we got into sheep in the vineyards because we went through a bit of a downturn after 2008. We had no money, and it seemed like a good way of cutting our costs, because if the sheep eat it, you don't need to mow it. So historically we just worked out how many sheep we thought we could carry, chucked them in there, and then pulled them out 6 months later. Subsequently, a lot of the industries moved away from that, mostly over compaction concerns, because they're wandering around on fairly wet ground all winter long. It gets a bit muddy, it doesn't look flash. And yeah, so we've tried to take it regenerative. I'm not sure whether I'm there yet. We've moved to one big mob. We put 1,300 lambs in last year, and we rotate them. We were on about a weekly shift, 4 to 6 days, and that seemed to work pretty well, but we were chewing it down quite low, because overgrazing honestly is a bit of a management tool for us. But the unfortunate thing of that is when you want to overgraze it is in the spring. And I can only really overgraze one corner of the vineyard well enough to do the job. So what we're going to go try for next year is we're going to try for daily shifts, if not 2 or 3 days. My sheep guy's not that keen on it because basically we have no venters. It's all 3-wire electric. It's a lot of work. But I'm basically at the point where I'm giving him grazing for free because I want the sheep in there as a tool. So he can take the money he would have paid for the grazing and spend it on fencing and moving the stock. And I'm finding it hard to get proper regenerative trampling with sheep, even with 1,300 of them. I'll be interested in hearing from the sheep and beef guys about whether you can do it with sheep, but I think that you need to move more often than once a day to get the actual proper density. But I think I'm doing good with the sheep. I think adding them in for 1 to 3 days a year is a positive for the soils, not a negative. So yeah, that's a reasonably good part of our operation. Feel free to chime in with a question if there's anything burning through you.
I've got just a comment. I have a business grazing sheep in the vineyards around Waipara, and we do that with mobs of about 500, and we move them about every 4 or 5 days. I think we've got 17 different vineyards that we run sheep on. It's a balance between doing what you guys want and getting enough performance out of the stock. So whenever you're overgrazing, you're doing harm, not harm, but you're not getting the performance out of the sheep that you want. But we also recognise that we're doing a job for you guys, so as with everything, there's always a balance.
Yeah, and I'd say that my sheep guy is actually less worried about the animal performance and more worried about the time he spends fencing because he's a merino farmer. Like, they're used to doing it tough. They're scrawny little things when they come to us, and they do amazingly well, even if we're being mean to them. So I think that if we go to daily shifts, his animal performance will go through the roof because they'll have it. And the other comment I'll make about this is we've had 1,200 the year before and 1,300 this year. We haven't had a dead one in 2 years. And I'm putting that down to the diverse mix covers. And that's just it, basically. You move them on fresh tuck all the time, and you've got a diverse mix that you're feeding them, and they do well.
Yep.
And like, can you think of 2 6-month periods where you've got that many sheep and you don't have a dead one? That's just phenomenal to me. Because, yeah, historically, we would have had 4 or 5 at least, if not 10 or 15 in a bad year. So
there's definitely ways you'll be able to do it. We've set up a van where we can run out 2 kilometres of fence in about 20 minutes with 2 of us.
yeah.
So if you get the right setup, you'll be able to do what you want to do.
Yeah, and I'm prepared to put some extra effort in to try it. And we'll just play around, we'll do a few daily shifts and we'll try a few 2 days and we'll see what it looks like it works.
So why aren't you permanently fencing your vineyard? It's pretty easy. From your freaking wire down and the blocks that you've done, you've only got your 2 ends to do.
I have done that in places, but you'll see a tool that I'm playing with later on that doesn't like wires. So I have got permanent fences in some places, but because I'm changing this up, I don't know where to put them.
There's only one row that you're not going to be able to get a piece of machinery down, or it'll probably be only one side.
Yeah, but it's how many. Like, if I want daily shifts, I've got to do a fence every 20 rows. So that's 1 row and 20 that I'm interfering with. And yeah, it all depends on the size. Well, I do that. I have got some permanent fences, but I still have to do the headlands.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is one of my options. I am doing it, but at the moment I'm not sure how big my blocks want to be. When I refine the system, I'll probably do a bit more permanent fencing.
Have you done any leaf plucking in the summer?
No, because we're landlocked by vineyards and my sheep guys go out the valley, it's not really convenient. I'd have to truck so many sheep down for such a small period of time. And honestly, I've got so much cover crop there, they probably wouldn't even go in. Yeah, the window for the summer leaf plucking is about 6 weeks between the flowering and the berries going soft. And if you've got a farmer next door and you can just open the gate, cool, go for it. But if you've got to truck them in, I don't.
It's a big advantage for the farmer, because I send all my skinny ewes down there. I send 3 truck and trailer loads down. I don't pay for that grazing during the summertime, but they come back in such good condition. At the time of year they're going to hit the ram. It's a big advantage for me. That's where I get my benefit from, and then I can send my sheep down there in the winter time. Even if I don't need to send them down there in the winter time, I'll do it because I'm getting a good advantage in the dry summer.
Yeah, well, I think that possibly it's just my sheep guy, because the merinos drop their lambs a bit later. They're sort of still lambs afoot and he wouldn't want to move them at that time. But yeah, it's not something I've done, but people do it in Marlborough. Anyway, I'd better move on. So now on to disease management. We're running this intensive canopy spray program. Starting out every 14 days, going every 7 through Christmas time, over the beginning of March. It is hard work. Powdery mildew is our big thing in grapes. We spray every spray for powdery. That's the thing we're covering for all the time. Botrytis is the next one. There's 3 or 4 of the sprays going for botrytis. The insect pests, there's the 3 insect pests. We have the odd example of downy mildew and phomopsis, and a lot of people do spray after pruning for trunk disease now. I don't like that much because it's a fungicide right in the middle of the off-season. So not something we're taking on. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're doing a big biological trial. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to sound like a salesman here because it's all one company. Historically, we've not had a product for powdery mildew. There's never been anything worth talking about in the biologicals field that would do powdery mildew. Well, something showed up and we thought, well, let's give this a nudge. So these are new products to market. They don't have ACDM, so we're basically putting them on as a fertiliser. Hopefully they'll get that through and get it fully registered as a biological pesticide shortly. It's a bit of an all or nothing game. Biologicals inside a conventional program, they're all fungi and bacteria, and if you're putting fungicides and bactericides on in a regular fashion, you're just going to kill them. So what we're putting on with this outfit is live bugs that are in a biofilm. So that means that they stay dormant and alive through manufacture, transport, mixing in the tank and then sprayed on, and supposedly they're still there when you need them. Yeah, you've really just got to try not to kill them. We're doing half the vineyard this year. We're running clean spray and a dirty one. This is either pretty brave or foolish. We did 5 hectares last year and it was mostly a success. We got it through to harvest with 1 chemical input. Usually we'd be doing a dozen more small molecule chemistries. We managed to get a bottle of proper grapes through to harvest in the tank in good condition with 1, and that was an impulse Sproxman. So I call that a success. We've gone from this massive chemical program down to a minuscule chemical program. We're hoping to make it work without that this year, but we're working harder. We're on a 7-day cycle at the moment. We're watching it like a hawk, and we've got the chemical on the shed as a backup. None of this comes easy. The biologicals, some of them you can mix with each other, but the one for botrytis you can't mix with the one for powdery. So when you want to spray for botrytis, you've got to run the tractor through again. And then, oh, whoops, we've run out of cover, we've got to run the tractors through again. So none of this comes easy. The cost is actually comparable. These guys are coming to the party. They know they've got a set of products that are actually, potentially game changers here. So we're pretty excited about it and we're trying to make it work. We're also adding fertiliser to every round, which leads me to our next thing, which is plant nutrition.
Is there a difference in the quality of the wine between the two trials?
Don't know yet. It was inconclusive last year. We had a little bit of canopy damage last year from a particular fertiliser that we were told to put on that we shouldn't have been. So we'll find out. No downside, basically. We're hoping there will be an upside in time. That's certainly, but I can't say for sure at this point that it's better. So plant nutrition, we do a lot for plant nutrition. We've got good soils, more excesses than deficiencies, so we're in the luxury of being pretty well set up to start with. So we have a big program doing trace elements and the macros, calcium, magnesium, sulphur. We've got enough P and K in spades, and I'll talk about Ian in a minute. I've got a lot of time for the people talking about healthy plants and healthy soil. They're one and the same thing. And if your plant needs something to grow faster, I think we need to give it to it, which will make the plant better, which will make the soil better. So we do a lot of trace work. This is what we do basically. Foliar fertiliser with the chemical program. We're just trying to optimise what we put on at each particular growth stage. An autumn soil primer is something I'm going to get into. I did it late in the winter this year, so that's humates, microbes and fish. That's to get the soil moving for the off-season. So giving the soil a starter in the autumn and then giving it time, because time is important. We have this big off-season where we don't have to mess with it. We don't have to put fungicides on, we don't have to put herbicides on. Let's give it some help at the start of that and try and reap the rewards at the end. So we use a bit of thiacal to help with calcium and sulphur availability, and variable rate gypsum is our only real soil correction. I've never used NPK fertiliser. Grapes just shouldn't need it in our soils. So this is one of the interesting things we're doing this year. I got on to Sap Analysis off John Kent's YouTube channel, and farmers are offering it. So we're doing a weekly test. It's expensive, but we're learning stuff. This is just, we've got a control block and a block next door. So the control block actually gets no fertiliser, and the other block gets the foliar program, so everything. So this is just to try and see some differences. And the one thing I point out on this is the nitrates. The fertiliser block is the lower line. We don't apply nitrogen to either of them, they're all the same treatment. But the inference I'm drawing is, look at the top line, moly. Someone will probably correct me on this, but I'm working on the assumption that if you provide adequate moly, the plant can convert the nitrogen faster. So I'm not sure that that's greatly significant, but it's something we've seen on the Sap Analysis by doing it weekly that reinforces what we're doing with the trace element work. And I'm learning stuff, and I think that's the most important thing. Right. I'm not here to say I'm God's gift to viticulture, I'm certainly not. There's no miracles. If you believe all the hype, our crops shouldn't get diseases, they should require no inputs, we should be making stink loads of money, and the system should be the same every year. I think there's enough farmers in the room to know that that never works. That's a bit of frost damage at the top. We had quite a good event this year, quite early, and that burnt us a little bit, and then the bottom one is actually grass scrub damage. I decided not to put the insecticide on that protects against grass scrub, and we got pretty hammered because it's been a mild winter. I'm not regretting that decision, because I think the insecticide is something I don't want to use. It's the only agrochemical product I've ever used that's made me feel ill. So I just don't want to use it. So now we're on to the tricky one. I'll try and wrap this up quickly, Sam. Herbicide. The industry's grappling with this. We use a lot of herbicide. You can see from here, this would be multiple applications all year long. So really we use it for nitrogen management. The vines just don't do well if you don't bear the strip underneath them and control vegetation. And I've found that even if you do that and you grow a full cover crop, they still can be devigorated. So it lets us do the cover cropping program without tillage, which is something that's pretty important to me. You can manage water with it. We've got more than enough NPK to grow a crop of grapes. Herbicide lets us release that into the crop. But unfortunately, glyphosate probably won't be available to us forever because the people who buy our wine don't want us to use it. So this is our program, 3 herbicides. We're adding fulvic units and EM fish, trying to mitigate the damage we're doing. Roundup is having a lot of resistance issues. We have got serious amounts of Roundup resistant ryegrass and mulberry. Clethodim we've used to try and control that, but that gets resistance issues as well. So our program is basically spraying out 1 metre out every 3 for a standard, or if we're establishing a cover crop, we spray 4 metres out every 6. So yeah, these are some of the alternatives we're trying. This is a weeding tool, a cultivation tool, and this is a weeding tool called a multi-clean, basically a weed eater mounted horizontal. So we're trying some stuff. This is a bit of science we're doing. So we've got a chemical-only row, a multi-clean row that's just had the weed whacker through it, a cultivated row, and then a treatment with our extra additives in. And Brigada Research working with us, they're going to do some DNA testing and tell us in time what effect we've had on the soil microbial community. So science is important. Hopefully we'll learn something from this. You can't actually see a lot of difference between these rows, but that's due to the weed spectrum that's there. That was all dandelions under those vines coming out of last year's herbicide strip. Unfortunately, when it's grass, you get this. This is one of my long-term trials, and it's a little hard to see, but the only difference there is a Roundup in the spring. And you can see that you've lost probably 90% of your canopy growth there, just from the grass growth. I know there's talk in the regen circles of, oh, just give it time and the plants will come through it. Well, that's 3 years in, and I need to do something. So I'm running, this is a long-term trial. I'm leaving that row, I keep the grass mode short, I'm not doing anything crazy, but those vines are just struggling to dominate the grass. The grass underneath them is the dominant thing in that ecosystem. So we've still got some more examples. I'm replicating this, it's not just one place. The tight soils need a lot of work. I can get away with stuff in the good silt, the deep silt, that I can't get away with where I've got a bit more clay in the soil. Right, there are organic options. Bolus tillage. It works. I'm in the no-till camp. I don't want to disturb the soil. I don't know how long you can keep doing this before you actually... I don't think you can get enough benefit out of that crop during the growing season to make up for the tillage you do. That may be contentious to some people, but that's my opinion. You can do it without cover cropping. You can just till under the vine, and that works for a time. But you're not doing that soil that you're turning over any good at all. This is the neighbour. And this works. He's got good healthy vines. His vines look better than mine right now because of the release from this tillage. So our best success has been with no grass. This is a 5 hectare block we're running with no herbicide this year. It's in the biological program, so we're going full hippie on this one. The only reason I can do it is this had a clethodim 2 years ago, and I need to pull the grass out. and I've planted covers in it, and I've got all these interesting species, but very little grass. And it's the only reason these vines aren't just dying a death here. So I haven't figured this out. The pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is a permanent perennial cover that the vines can live with, that I don't have to do too much to, I don't have to round up, but we're not there yet. There's heaps of people trying heaps of things, but no one's found the answer. So tillage works, unbind tillage works. There's lots of good tools out of Europe. It's generally twice the fastest at half the speed as your herbicide program. So economically, you can see 4 times the work. So this is my last one. I'm using inter-row management help. I'm growing big crops in the winter and I'm releasing them in the spring when I need the nitrogen. This is an example of what we did this year with mowing. Mowing close, you can see the grass has actually been really devigorated. Well, you can barely see it. I'm going to crimp the other row. This is costing me money. I'm playing around, I'm pushing the envelope here. I don't advocate that the whole wine industry should do this, but I'm doing it because I want to learn. And hopefully some of the things I'm learning, some other people don't have to make the same mistakes that I'm doing. Frost is a factor in the spring with having long covers. We've got to be mindful of that. We got burnt this year, and if you have longer grass, there is a marginal difference in how severe your frosts are. Yeah, so I'll wrap it up there. That's really the summary of what we're trying to do. Grow more grapes. I'm not accepting lighter yields. I want to grow more. I want them to be better. I want my soil health to be better with all the good things that come with that. We're still going to be supplementing plant health with nutrition into the future. I don't see that ending. But I'd like to reduce our reliance on the chemical plant protection and herbicide. That's about it. We'll call it there, and I guess you can ask me some questions.